ladies, gentlemen, variations therein, welcome to another episode of MasterSleaze Theater. In this series, we take works of literature and we give them the dramatic reading they deserve. If by literature, of course, you mean the smuttiest, weirdest things we can find on the internet. So enjoy. This week we have something particularly fun for you to enjoy. If you are a fan of dinosaurs, if you are a fan of the terrifying T-Rex, if you have watched Jurassic Park and thought, why am I wet? Then this episode is for you. A reminder, this channel is meant for those over 18 years of age, as they deal with some sexual content. However, people of every age, over 18, can enjoy these works as they were meant to be written, with just enough grossness to make it worth it. So without further ado, let me introduce the book for this week. This week on MasterSleaze Theater, Taken by the T-Rex by Christie Sims. Morning dawned bright and clear, birds singing in the trees as a breeze ruffled through Drin's hair, waking her. She stretched and yawned, trying to shake off the effects of her narcotic-induced slumber. Gruel approached and stared at her pert breasts hungrily before he offered her some water in a stone bowl. Drin dripped her fingers into the cool water and splashed some on her face, drinking from the bowl as Gruel stared at her semi-naked body. "What are we going to do?" Drin asked Gruel.
"Why you ask Gruel?" the burly man asked. "Gruel not know what to do."
His eyes traveled over her curves and muscular frame, saying without words exactly what he wished to do. Drin was used to being stared at by men, and had had offers to share the beds of various men in the tribe. She had waited until she was older before she had allowed one of the younger men to have her. The whole experience had been thoroughly boring and painful to Drin, and she had not bothered to do it again. All she needed to be happy was the thrill of the hunt. Drin rose and shoved the bowl back into Gruel's hands before making her way across to another group of people who were talking quietly amongst themselves. "What are we going to do about the big lizard?" Blank stares were all the response she got. "We must kill it," Drin shouted. "For revenge, for our dead, for our homes." Drin was angry now. Why did these pathetic fools believe they were safe now? What happens when it comes back? The comment was greeted by some grumbled responses and a few shouts of fright. Drin held up her priceless cutter and shouted, "I want a meat!" 2 months passed before the Tyrannosaurus Rex struck again. A summer storm had blown in, darkening the skies and forcing all but the hardiest of the villagers to shelter inside their makeshift homes, hiding from the violent rain which hammered from the sky. From one end of their plain to the other, the grass was flattened by pouring rain, branches were blown from trees in the forests nearby, and the river was ripped into a frothy torrent. Drin stood in the open, her hair plastered to her neck and shoulders as she marveled at the power contained in nature. Lightning flashed, illuminating the whole plain, and cold fear shot into her chest and stomach as she saw the shape of the big lizard stalking across the plain towards them. "It's come for us!" Drin yelled into the living space as Gruel rolled off a tree, annoyance crossing his face at her interruption of his rutting, and he stood with his erection pointing at Drin as she tried to make him understand. It was Sri, however, who noticed Drin had become deathly pale and shook like an infant. The woman stood and threw a loincloth at Gruel. "Cover yourself, man," she ordered him. "The big lizard has found us." Both she and Drin ran through the new huts, screaming the news and rousing people who were taking the opportunity for the storm to rest or have sex, which was the exact moment that the tree nearest them exploded. Pieces of deadwood were thrown high into the air as the big lizard stamped into the clear, grassy area in which the villagers had chosen to make their new home. The Tyrannosaurus Rex had to be at least 10 feet from head to tail and stood 6 feet high at the hip. It was partially covered in green plumage, filament-like feathers coating its underbelly and flanks. Drin knew this indicated that it was an adolescent, that it would be attempting to mark out its territory, making it violently aggressive. It opened its mouth, revealing frightening teeth of varying lengths, and screamed a high-pitched yell of rage, bringing fear to all who heard it. Its nostrils flared and saliva ran freely from its vast cavern of a maw. Every so often the creature shuddered, and a wave ran through the feathers covering its underbelly. Head and tail stuck straight out fore and aft, making a horizontal line from which the legs extended dead center. It had beady little eyes in comparison to the size of its huge skull, but those eyes were the keenest on this entire plane, being at least 3 times more accurate than a human eye. Both small eyes were situated at the front of its head, giving it amazing depth perception and all-around sight. It took another step towards the village, and Dren leapt from behind the hut she had been using for cover, jabbing at the beast's eyes with her long stick. The stone tip came nowhere near the lizard's eyes, however, and it dodged her thrusts with ease and turned to scream at her in rage. Dren trotted off in the direction of the trees, hoping the lizard would chase her instead of the others. The T-Rex strode off in the same direction, entering the trees as she taunted the beast with shouts and thrown rocks. Dren could hear the big lizard stamping through the trees and poised herself to slash the holding tie with her cutter as soon as she saw its snout poke between the 2 jagged rocks. Hearing a snuffling, grunting noise, Dren realized the beast was close and drew back her hand in final preparation for the blow. She saw a green scaled nose break from the cover of the rocks and slash downward with her cutter, the keen flint edge severing the gut twine and biting into the cedar bark. The big lizard gave a thunderous, roaring scream as the springy branch full of pointed sticks connected sharply with the tip of the T-Rex's nose. Although it did little actual damage, it served to make the animal jump and lose its temper even more. Dren's stomach muscles clenched in delicious pleasure as she heard the beast roar. This is what excited Dren. Hunting, outsmarting, and outthinking her quarry gave her a thrill no man could ever match. She shivered and ran into the woods towards her next trap, allowing the creature to glimpse her as she went. The big lizard screamed and gave chase as fast as it could. This had also been part of Dren's plan. Claws scrabbling, the Tyrannosaur headed towards the woman who had caused it so much pain and annoyance. It could see the 2-legged creature walking backwards as it approached. A small knot of concern developed within its tiny brain. Not fear, certainly, but awareness of something different. Dren turned and ran for her next trap. Springing along the trail, suddenly horny as hell, Dren had to fight the urge to touch herself between the legs as she ran and gave the big lizard chase. Somehow she must have become confused and lost her bearings, possibly due to the thrill of the hunt. Dren found herself climbing a sandstone path up to a hilly region and what looked to be a small carved box canyon. Dren could hear the clawed feet of the big lizard approaching from behind her as she tried to climb the smooth, curved surface of the cavern to no avail. Fear shot through her, mingling with the arousal she felt to create a completely new feeling, one which she did not entirely hate. She turned to see the big lizard approaching her slowly, knowing there was no escape for her. Blood dribbled from its knee joint, right foot, a little from its nose. The injuries, however, were nothing to this creature as it calmly walked towards her. Dren watched as the creature studied her. Was there caution in its reptilian eyes, or just her imagination? It made low, growling sounds deep in its throat, and its head rocked slowly from side to side, scenting her. Then it lunged. Ladies, gentlemen, variations therein, now is the point in the story when, if you are not interested in hearing any of the sensuous details of dinosaur on huntress action, now is the time when you should skip to the end of the video. However, why are you here if that's the case? Anyways, let's continue. Dren turned her body in an attempt to run, her fight or flight reaction being automatic. In a heartbeat, the great lizard was upon her, its grasping, immensely strong forelegs clamping her arms with an unbreakable grip. She screamed in pain and fright as the 2 fingers on each hand seized her biceps, squeezing hard. She waited for the rending teeth to tear her flesh and muscle from her snapping bones, and to see her blood fountaining before her eyes. Instead, the pain from her arms actually decreased minutely as she hung suspended in the air. Looking down, Dren could see her body, past her breasts with their erect nipples, past her flat stomach and down to the loincloth which hung loosely from her hips. Hot breath caressed the small of her back, sending an exquisite thrill throughout her body as the big lizard sniffed her. Without warning, it ripped her loincloth away. She looked down once more, shocked at the actions of this monster, to see the curls of her own dark pubic hair. Beneath her feet was an object which she was unable to identify. 2 feet in length, it was as thick as her arm at the elbow, except for the end which tapered down to a blunt point, dark red and solid. When the realization hit her like a punch in the stomach, she began to struggle and writhe. There was no way that this creature would be able to shove that massive member inside her. Legs kicking and head thrashing from side to side, Dren screamed and cried out for the big lizard to let her go or just kill and eat her, either which would be preferable to being torn apart by its cock. There was no response from the creature, save for a gentle lowering of her body toward that massive Drin stilled as she felt the first touch of the creature's moist bobbing against her thighs. Waiting for the final push, which would surely split her in two, Drin felt tears dampen the side of her nose and cheeks as her emotions boiled over. In a vain attempt to make it hurt less, Drin opened her legs as far as she was able to while hanging in midair. The creature drove upward, smashing the tip of its into her. It was way too big to actually fit, and so the length of it slid along her, spreading her wide and stroking across the super-sensitive tissues there. Drin screamed, even though it had not hurt anywhere as much as she believed it would. In confusion, the T-Rex drew back and tried to penetrate her again, the result being the same, its long, rough grazing across her as it thrust. The effect was actually beginning to feel nice to Drin. Even though the thought of this vile beast arousing her was disgusting, it was better than being devoured. Once again, the big lizard tried to push itself inside her and was unable to, merely grinding her hard against its. Drin had a thought then, a thought which might allow her to get away from this situation alive and in one piece. It was not a thought that Drin particularly enjoyed thinking, but she believed that her idea just might work. Reaching down as the big lizard smashed forward once more, she caught the girth of its in her hands and drew it towards her body, increasing the area of nerve endings which were being stimulated. The T-Rex seemed to appreciate this. It growled out a moan of pleasure and started to pound away at her flesh, the tapered tip of the sliding between her swollen breasts. It seemed as if time stood still. There was nothing in this entire world apart from the grunting, grinding, growling lizard and Drin wrapped around its. She managed to bring her legs up, locking her ankles around its as well, the entire length of her body becoming a for this animal to. However, she was able to feel the solidness of it relentlessly sliding atop her. Gradually, the feeling of pleasure began to spread from her most sensitive areas. Waves of intense feeling pulsing through her body in a way she had never felt before. The crashing sensations through her system eventually brought her to the brink, and she had the first orgasm of her life, grinding herself against the monster's she did, crying with intense pleasure. The big lizard was nowhere near finished, however, and carried on blindly, not registering that she had come, hammering its against her. She could see the red tip of its thick stabbing upward between her breasts with each stroke. Drin could not believe the amazing feelings which were shooting through her body and issuing from her battered. If she got out of this, she resolved to find herself a young and energetic bedfellow, and show him how to do this to her. Unbelievably, Drin started to feel herself building up towards another intense climax. As she came, she clutched tightly onto the big lizard, her arms and legs tightening onto the The Tyrannosaurus Rex yelled loudly as pints of white fluid shot from the tip of its fat cock to splash onto the rocks below them. Once, twice, then a third time the big lizard rammed its shaft against her naked body. Each time more of its semen ejaculated across the canyon, wetting the rocks below. Apparently finished, the T-Rex simply let Drin fall to the ground, her used and soaking body hitting the dirt near its feet as she stepped back and began to turn. Drin grabbed for her cutter, which had fallen to the ground as she had been hoisted into the air. The big lizard had turned almost completely around and was just about to move off when Gruul ran into the box canyon, yelling his lungs out. Drin was confused. If he had seen her mating with the beast, would he say anything to the villagers? If he had not seen her, should she try and aid him in killing the creature? Drin was exhausted and sat, watching the lizard as it batted Gruul's long stick away and snapped its powerful jaws together around his chest, severing the man in two. Drin could not even begin to think she would stand a chance against the violent beast, and simply stayed where she was while the thing chewed on Gruul's head briefly, before picking the remainder of him up and swallowing him whole. Once his appetite had been satisfied, the big lizard walked off. Once in the village again, she told the story of how she had run and been cornered, and how Gruul had died heroically trying to save her. Yet ultimately, the big lizard had lost interest once Gruul had been eaten. Drin had washed herself down and rejoined the small community around another large fire, scanning the young men for a suitable-looking man to service her. Ladies, gentlemen, variations therein, thank you for watching this week's episode of MasterSleaze Theater. If you enjoyed this content and would like to hear more, please do us a favor and subscribe to this channel. Also, hit that notification bell, as the kids like to call it these days, to be made aware of when we release new videos for your enjoyment. If you want to see something specific, we are always looking for qualified content, so please comment on this video as well to let us know what you'd like to see. But for now, stay smutty. We'll see you next week.